everybody. Teddo.
My starter home was tiny, but they had the best backyard. It was wooded, and on both sides there were old widowed ladies who never went in the backyard. So our backyard was like being in the secluded woods. Until one of the widow ladies had to go into a nursing home, and a couple bought the place. The woman was about our age, late 20s, but she was batshit crazy. And her husband was like 15 years older. And the woman, okay, she couldn't really focus. She was like really impulsive. Like one day, she comes running over to our house wearing only a towel, and she wants to borrow a cup of sugar. Like, okay, you think, you need sugar so badly you can't throw on a robe or get dressed. And like, okay, there is a sense of, it would be nice to have. A lot of my neighbors went over only wearing a towel, but she wasn't one of the ones that would have cared to see in a towel. Or like one time, she's riding down the street on a unicycle, which isn't that weird, but then never again, just like the once on a unicycle. And so we realized that she was really impulsive, she couldn't focus. But on the other hand, we found out that her husband, the older guy, she had convinced him to leave the priesthood, to marry her when she was in her early 20s. And then she told me at one point, when she was 12, she said to him, Father Blank, someday I'm going to marry you. And she worked for 10 years to convince him to leave the priesthood and marry her. So she could focus, But none of that was what really bothered me about her. The one thing that really bothered me about her was she decided that too many cars were cutting through our street at rush hour, cutting from one highway to the next. And so she went to the city and she got like all these restrictions. You couldn't turn left off one street, you couldn't turn right off the other. Pretty soon there was 4 things you couldn't do, and I had a bitch of a time getting home after work. It was like a combination of them. You had to think how to get home. But none of that was why we sold the house. The house was 1,050 square feet. We had our second kid. It was way too small as a starter home. So we put it on the market, and pretty soon 2 women bought the place. A lesbian couple bought the place. And it was very cool signing the contract because they couldn't get married in Michigan, you couldn't, whatever, but they could commit to the mortgage, and that's a pretty serious commitment. And I felt like I was part of something really nice. They were, obviously like really happy, and I felt that was great. But the neighbor, let's call her Sally. Whenever I use Sally, it's a fake name. But Sally somehow found out and didn't like it because at the inspection, Sally had moved all of her cars into her backyard. She had an attached garage, but she moved all of her cars into the backyard. She wanted them to think they'd be moving in next to a junkyard, I guess, so they wouldn't buy the house. And I found out later she was trying to sour them and buying the house because she didn't want them for neighbors. But they didn't buy into that. And so they went forward, and a couple weeks later I pulled in my driveway, and I get out of the car, and Sally comes running across to me, and she said, I can't believe you're selling your house to lesbians. You're betraying, or like, she didn't say betraying, but she was yelling at me. And I said, Sally, they're really nice people. My wife and I, we've never had sex in the front yard. They're not going to be doing anything that bothers you. Leave them alone. Okay, a little bit of background. My wife is Jewish, and on that street, in that suburb, she was the only Jewish person. And I guess they thought I was Jewish also, but I'm from Roseville, I was raised Catholic. My mom made me make my confirmation, and I am the most lax Catholic, or at least tied with everyone in this. There's no more lax Catholics. The last time I went to confession, I was 13. The next time I go to confession, the priest had better bring a lunch. But I had to go to catechism for 7 or 8 years, so I know the dogma, okay? So back on that day, Sally said to me, you're Jewish, so you don't get it, but we're Catholic, and for us, homosexuality is a sin. You know how sometimes, like a half hour later, you know what to say? I knew immediately what to say. I knew what to say was, no, I'm Catholic, and fucking a priest is a way worse sin. But then I caught myself, and I thought, no, what I want for these women is for Sally to think of them as the unicycle, like to be bothered now, but like forget about them. And I thought if I hit her with that line, which was true, but also pretty mean, she would turn it into one of her 10-year campaigns maybe, and these women would have a hassle for a long time. So I bit my tongue, and I said, they're nice people, Sally, just leave them alone. And what ended up happening, they moved in, they lived there for a few years. She gave them shit for a little bit and then moved on to something else. One of them had a baby, they moved on to a non-starter home, and so I'm happy that I didn't hit her with the line. But I have to admit, as I was staying there for the weeks as we were waiting for closing, I felt like biting my tongue was a bit of a loss, because it was like the best line I had ever come up with in my entire life, and I didn't use it, But then, the night before I moved, I did have a small victory. I was turning left, coming home after work, off of one of the things she had made illegal, and there was a mass traffic stop. Like a cop stopped me and waved me over, and there was a line of about 6 or 7 cars waiting at the curb, and a second cop was walking down the line writing tickets. And I pull over, and as I'm waiting for the cop to get to me, the ex-priest, her husband, gets pulled over, and he's behind me. And the cop gets to me, and I say, officer, I live on this street, and there's this crazy woman, and she's made all these rules, and I can't even get home, really. And I said, and he said, yeah, she's been going and complaining to the police chief, and that's why we're out here tonight. He said, you know what, I'm going to give you a break, just going to give you a warning tonight, next time it's a ticket. Which was cool with me, because again, I was moving the next day. But I said to him, officer, the guy behind me, that's her husband. And he smiled and he thanked me. And as he was walking back to her car, I saw him pull a citation book out of his pocket.